George James Cordrey, United States Marine Corps, World War II. George is one of my all-time favorite veterans. We became friends after our interview. We did many school programs together, and I miss him dearly. I met him and his wife Betty back then almost 20 years ago. George passed away in 2011. He's up there with all the other veterans waiting for a great reunion that's going to happen someday, and I'm going to be there too. So, George, I interviewed George in Cincinnati, Ohio. I met other Iwo Jima veterans at that time. It was 2004, December 9th. I interviewed George. He told me a gripping story, folks, one of the best stories I've ever heard of the Battle of Iwo Jima. And you're in for a gem of a story, folks. This is really powerful. And I would invite you to have your family members and those loved ones that you want to learn about history to watch George's story. I'd like to thank Kevin Shira again. Kevin, thank you for your continued support of my work. God bless you, sir. It's an honor to work with you. Kevin wants to dedicate this story for George Cordrey in honor of his uncle who served at Iwo Jima. His name was PFC Claude A. Lind. He served with D Company of the 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines, 5th Marine Division as a light machine gunner. He landed on the island February 19th, 1945 and was wounded. And unfortunately, 6 days later, on this February 25th, 1945, he passed away from his wounds. So we salute you, Private Lind. And Kevin, again, thank you for telling the story. Amen. Hey, folks, if you'd like to help sponsor a story, if you've been touched by these stories, I've got a lot of them to share. Please consider, I would encourage you to consider sponsoring them. There's information in the video description, in the comment section of this video, and on my website, larrycappetto.com. Don't take it for granted, folks. Freedom is not free. Freedom is earned. We need to give back, okay? Thank you for sharing these stories, and thank you for subscribing to my channel. I'm just really happy to share with you today George Cordrey's story. Comment on it. Let me hear from you, and I'll talk to you again. God bless you. Once in a while, I look in the camera. Don't let that bother you. Okay. Just be relaxed. But I think we've got his last name spelling on the.
Yes.
Okay.
Larry, there are bells going to be ringing you throughout the day.
Okay.
That's
That's part of the game. It's part of 4th Marine Division.
Yes.
You served in the same company as John, or the same?
No,
Okay.
same division, that's about it.
Okay. Okay. All right. Just now, you went in. Did you land on D-Day itself, February
Yes, sir.
19th?
Yes.
Okay, George, the best you can remember, can you kind of just tell me about the night before, the preparations for Iwo, and then actually, did you get up, did you have a last meal, and then going into the beach that day?
Well, the night before is pretty uptight. It's like, what's going to happen, and how are we going to do this? We've done it before. But in the morning, they get us up. It was about like 4 a.m., I guess, and we had steak and eggs. That's the favorite last meal, for the troops. And then we prepared to board the Higgins boats, and once you're down the ladder and into the boats, they float in formation until they get the go. And when they get the go, they elongate into a single file abreast and go. And my facility, my company, was in the 7th wave.
Okay. What do you remember about, did you go down the cargo nets, those rope
Yes.
nets? Okay. Was it dark? Was it morning? What do you remember about that?
I would say it was dawn. It was light. And yes, and the Higgins boat's going up and down like this, and the ship is going like this, and you got to coordinate going down that rope that you don't get caught between the ship and the Higgins boat and get into the Higgins boat. And then however many men, 50, 60 men are in that boat. And the coxswain, the Navy guy, he just circles until all the assembly is together and the wave before you goes, and then you go.
What do you remember about the ride-in, what you were hearing, what you were seeing, and what you knew about what was going on ahead of you?
Here I don't remember that we knew what was going on. You could hear it, of course, and see the explosions ashore. And the waves, the sea was relatively calm. It didn't bother me unless you get below the gunnels of if you get below the sides of the Higgins boat, you very apt to get sick. So I kept my head above. Although, you know, it's down, you're hunkering down in there trying to stay out of the way. But it was a normal, we'd done it before. We'd had other maneuvers and other practices, if you would, and so we just did what we were trained to do, and away we went. It was cloudy, I remember, it wasn't sunny.
So you're going in, you're getting closer to shore. How are you feeling? What are you experiencing? You're getting ready to land.
Don't hit me with anything. That's what I'm thinking. Just that's what you're trained to do. It's second nature. And having been at Roy Namur in the Kwajaleins, I had experienced a combat landing before. I didn't anticipate this would be as tough. Roy Namur was rather, I don't want to say simple, but it was a whole lot easier than this was going to be. And the closer we got, then finally the naval bombardment stopped because our first wave was ready to hit, you know. And then the gunfire ceased, so we wouldn't be hit with friendly fire, of course. And you're told to lock and load your piece, and then you get down. This time you hunker down, and they drop the ramp, and away you go.
What do you remember about that? The ramp's down, you're going. Had the Japanese started firing at that point?
No, they waited till we were pretty much ashore. Then we were dead. We were sitting ducks because this was just a black ash, a cinder ash that we were running into. It was like sand. And some of the people, the tanks and amphibious vehicles ahead of us were already bogged down, even before they rose.
I heard that volcanic ash was like running in water, trying to run in water. Were you sinking up? Were you going down into it?
Sinking, no, but to go down into it, like to get 2 feet down, you'd have to go 4 feet across. It just kept caving, just like moist sand, only black.
Okay, tell me about now. The ramp went down. You went onto the beach. Where were you? And then what do you remember about the Japanese opening up? I mean, was it just a big explosion? What happened?
Well, when the ramp went down and we emptied, and we walked run into the sand, you know, it was like walking on a heavy sand beach. And I remember the first man from our battalion that I encountered had been Gunny Sergeant Dione, D-I-O-N-N-E, and he was standing facing us, and he'd already received 2 on-field promotions. He was already a first lieutenant because he was the sole survivor of this mass of humanity, of the officers. So he'd already received 2 field promotions. So he said, "George, get your men down. Get them spread out, get them down." So that's what we did. We got ashore and started digging. And up above, in front of us, you could hear the fire, but the Japs were embedded in the ground there, and they had observation points in Suribachi and the cliffs on the right, and we were right dead center. And we began to get amphibious vehicles and supplies. That was our job, shore party, was to get the supplies ashore. and move them forward to the people up front. And they just began to hit the boats, the Higgins boats. They were firing pot shotting at them now. And they knew we were coming. They were ready for us. They'd roll their piece heavy guns out of the side of these cliffs and fire and roll back. So they were hard to spot, hard to get at, because the air support was coming down over the beach in a horizontal position, attempting to fire into these apertures as they saw them. And it just was get in, get down, and do your thing, do whatever. My job as an assistant in the battalion, sergeant major, was merely administrative. I was not in a firing position. It was just to get the things organized as I was taught to do. But they were pot shotting at us all day. When it got dark, we could see that our tanks and other amphibian vehicles had not gotten very far inland. I think penetration was maybe 300-400 yards, as I remember. Because of the soil being prohibitive, it wasn't easy to advance, even with track vehicles. So at night, it kind of quieted down. We were told to stay put. Do not wander around. You get shot for sure. And I vividly remember that first night, I hearing a guy hollered, "Corpsman," that was the call for injury. "Corpsman, Corpsman, Corpsman," and nobody moved. Nobody moved, because it was just stay where you're at, don't move. So nobody went for this call. I never knew whether it was a Japanese or an injured Marine or what it was. But we stayed the night. And the next morning, well, you could hear artillery all night between them and us. You could hear it go that way, and then come back, answering fire all night long. Fortunately, none of them got close to me or us. And the next day, we began to infiltrate, we began to receive field reports on casualties and so on. And that was one of my jobs, was to assemble these various reports into one group report for higher up.
You were getting firsthand account of how bad it really was. What type of processing were you doing with these reports?
Well, we would receive these reports daily from our subordinate units. We being the battalion headquarters, we would get the 3 company reports, companies A, B, and C, and I would consolidate them into one major report that went on up into division headquarters. So they had an ongoing daily report of who was all right and who wasn't. Individual statistics about personnel or persons was not available, just the numbers. And that was done every day, and it had to be at 08 or 0900, I can't recall. It had to be assembled and moved on up so that there was an ongoing.
What was that telling you about the brutality of the battle? I mean, that was showing you that it was more than you thought it would have been, or I mean, what were you thinking?
Was, oh, sure, it was. Well, when we got stopped that first night, it was not my military opinion, but there were rumors around us by our officers that had the Japanese, they made a major military mistake by not countering an attack that night, because we were only 200-300 yards ashore, and they would have pushed us right on back. But they didn't, fortunately. And our guys were after that first airfield. The 4th Division went in on the right side, the 5th Division went on the left abreast, and then got ashore and split. And the second day or the third day, the 3rd Marine Division came in and was pushed into that breach because the casualties were becoming.
Now, did you see the casualties? Were you there when these men were being shot and blown up and all this? I mean,
Well, I saw the stretcher bearers, and so bring the people down that they could carry and put them on the Higgins boats for evacuation. Yeah, it was happening right in front of us.
Can you ever be prepared or trained for something like that? I mean, what were you thinking in your mind? I mean,
Well, let me regress a little
Okay.
bit. At Roy Namur, when we went ashore there, the first casualty I saw was a Japanese ashore. And he had expired. He was very dead. And it didn't bother me in the least. But the first American that I saw shot or maimed really got to me. I got goosebumps now. I mean, that's something to see when it's your own guys. The other guy was the enemy, and I didn't really care. So on Iwo, these guys were going down and onto the boats. I knew that they were going out to the hospital ships and would be taken care of as well as could be. We were a mass of people on this beach, mass piles of supplies and ammunition, and we're still getting stuff ashore. Every time a boat can go back and get some more, they're bringing ashore. But that was our job, to get the stuff into a stockpile, if you will, and then distributed to those who requisitioned or requested help. So the stuff is always moving. The second night, in the dead of night, there was these various mortar pops into us because we were just sitting ducks there. And one of the rounds must have hit to or into an ammunition pile, dump, if you will. And the thing started exploding, you know, like fireworks, only with a much deadlier consequence. And you hear this roar, boom, boom, boom. And one of the Marines on that beach, who I never became familiar, nor do I know his name to this day, started up a unarmored bulldozer and pushed the sand up over this and suffocated this firing off this dump. I don't know how many people he would have saved. It never did, you know, fully blow in one shot, but it would have been there. Eventually, that's what would have happened. But this guy got on that bulldozer and with that blade pushed this sand right, just kept piling on there until it was extinguished. That I remember. Every night we would get incoming fire that was accurate, but we didn't know why. And there was an old rusty hunk of a boat ashore, no, a bow ashore. It was been there for, I guess, years. And the Japanese infiltrated every night an individual onto that ship. And he acted as a forward observer for the mortarmen that were firing at us. He could spot what was happening. And it took 2 or 3 nights before they got him. One of our Marine Corps guard dogs finally got him. And that stopped the night firing because he was no longer observing for them. So that dog, whomever or wherever he came from, was a great help.
what do you remember about? I may be jumping ahead just a little bit, but tell me what you remember about the famous flag raising. I know there were 2, but Were you around? Were you aware of the fact that a flag had gone up, and what did that mean to you?
Well, we didn't see nor were we aware of the first one.
Mm-hmm.
But when they did the second one, when you're anywhere on a Marine Corps installation and you see the flag being hoisted, everybody to a man just hollers out colors. Well, at that instant when they hollered colors, I was at the base, on the beach at the base looking up at it. And when they holler colors and you spin and you see it going up, get goosebumps.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It was an amazing sight. And that was just like the third day maybe, or the fourth day, and that indicates when you raise your flag, you indicated that you've secured your objective. Not this time. No, I think only 5 of that group of men were killed before they never got off the island. And I think the last one may have just died recently. But sure, that's a heck of a sight to see.
What about combat now? I've heard this and I've read this, that the Japanese were so dug into the island that it was, as far as morale went, you didn't see any dead Japanese for at least at the beginning. I mean, is that true?
Yeah, well, that's true. However, again, in my situation, I did not go inland. As I recall, I don't remember seeing a live Japanese on that island. I was there until March 26th, before we were relieved. But I didn't see a live Jap. They basically stayed in at daytime and would come out at night, or they'd have booby traps, or they'd be transfer our frontline people. The minute they'd get up and move, they'd draw fire. Must have been horrible up there. I just never was forward.
What about the island itself? I mean, I've heard that it's underneath it, it's hot, it's the smell. What do you remember about the smell?
I don't recall any odor at all. Well, I don't know that it was hot either, like a volcano or any kind of heat at all. I don't recall. I know it was 14 or 15 days before I could even take my leggings and shoes off, because it rained almost constantly on us. Bad weather. They chose a bad time of the year or season, if you will, in that area to pull this off, because it wasn't like they had anticipated when we got there at all. We were in a tide instead of at low tide. Things just didn't go right. But pressed on, and the guys up front just kept going. I'm amazed. I'm so thankful I didn't have to do that. But that wasn't my job, and we all did our job, and that's it.
What do you think, George, what was the worst sight that you maybe saw on the island? I mean, what comes to your mind when I ask you that question? What was the hardest thing for you, or the worst thing that you saw?
There was a tracked vehicle of ours. It appeared to be a steam shovel or some type of shovel. And a young man had gotten down into a kneeling and head down position for self-protection, and something hit him in the area of his base of his spine and just went right up his back and laid him open. He was just laying there in 2 halves. And that will bother you, and that bothered me. That's the worst sight that I saw. One afternoon during some of this mortar barrage, a major and a captain came down from one of the frontline units to talk with our commanding officer about the status and supplies and whatever, because they were in a closed door meeting, if you will, but as I recall, the major told me, they said, we got to go get out of here. We're going back up to the front where it's safe. And I was sitting in what we called our foxhole. I was exposed from here up maybe, and sitting there still trying to shovel somewhere to get down. And a mortar round hit, and I felt severe heat on my back and my neck. And these two guys were walking right here by me, right here at eye level, and they both went down. Well, I asked the buddy who was in the foxhole with me, did I get burned? Did I get powder burn or hit or anything? He said no. But these two guys were laying there, so I got up and went out around to take a look and see what their status was, and they were just, their whole top of their head was gone, both of them. Never knew what hit them. There's holes in the back of the jacket of the one guy where it went right through him. But in one swoop, they just took the tops of their head. Their heads looked almost like like two soup bowls. They were completely beheaded, scalped. That didn't sit too well with me either, of course, and you think about those guys, they're going back up where it's safe, they walk away, walk around. They were only meeting here, 10 feet away, and walk around, that mortar hit, and it wasn't their time, and they both took it. So those things are, I will remember. The guy hunkered down alongside of that shovel, though, that was just laid open. Those three people never knew what hit them, though, fortunately.
Was it hard for you when you came back to talk about the war? I mean...
No, sir.
Yeah.
Never regretted a day of being in the Marine Corps. I still don't. Makes a man of you. I was never in such good shape as I was then. Haven't been since. But it's, I wouldn't trade it for the world, being in the Marine Corps. We finally, after about 2 weeks, we got a chance to eat some hot chow. The Navy brought in some portable kitchen equipment, and we finally got some hot meals. And I used to sneak up to the hospital tent during the day once in a while, and I'd talk to one of the corpsmen, and they had alcohol for medicinal purposes, and I told him I needed some. So he'd provide us some of them little airline type bottles. Some of the guys in my company, right in my headquarters, were hit, expired. One was a lieutenant, I think his name was Zimmer, big burly, tobacco chewing, cigar, stub hat that peaked down here. He thought nothing would ever hit him, and he got it on you. Well, he was one of the officers that was killed. But there were 5,000 killed, like 10 or 12,000 wounded of all the services, but the Japs lost 40,000 men. We were back on the ship leaving on March 26th, I think it was, and it came over the ship radio that under the first airfield, a separated horde of Japanese numbering some 200 made a kamikaze attack on those troops that were left behind, and of course they're all in their happy hunting ground. None of them made it. They got them all. I remember the first aircraft fighter P-51 that landed on the airfield that we took. Dead stick landing saved him and the aircraft. I remember the first B-29 that landed coming back from Tokyo. It had an engine out, and he came in on his belly, belly landed and swiveled and went up against one of the dunes and did not catch a fire. That saved that crew. But Iwo was in a direct line between Saipan, between Tinian and Tokyo. And the B-29s could not make the round trip what fuel they could carry. So they needed an intermediate point for fighters that could go aloft and escort. So that was the purpose of getting Iwo, was to get the airfield. And as I read recently in statistics, there's some 2,500 airmen who are alive today because of Iwo Jima. So the far-reaching effects were great, and like I say, seeing the first one come in and make it safely down and having those P-51s buzzing around was a great feeling, because they had no air force there at all. It was all American. Primarily Navy, of course. And it was 800 ships, I think. It was the largest armada prior to, well, it was the largest armada that I know of at that time in the Pacific, of 800-something ships. And you can't imagine putting 800 ships out there and having not bumping into one another. It's amazing what it takes to put that procedure together. But we were based on Maui at that time, and it was rumored that we were going to go back to Guam and restage for return for the invasion of Japan. But the people of Maui propositioned and were successful in petitioning the government to bring their 4th Marine Division back to Maui. So by golly, they were successful, and we went all the way back to Maui. Because at that time, every able-bodied military man in the Pacific was being readied for the Japanese invasion. We were supposed to be at Iwo 3 days and then reboard and go on to Okinawa and be in the Okinawa invasion. But we didn't, because we were stuck there.
Hold on. Okay, I'll put this back on you. You're doing great. Okay, there you go. So you thought 3 days and then you're out
Then
of
we
there.
were going to go back and go on to Okinawa, but of course we didn't. We were supposed to go back to Guam then, but of course we didn't. We went all the way back to Maui. But we were in a get-ready situation. Like I said, was going to become, I think they called it the 10th Army that in the Pacific. We had the 6th Division by that time, and the 6th Division went to Okinawa instead of the 4th. So we got back to Maui, and eventually Harry Truman saved my life when he dropped the bomb. I will forever believe that. That man saved my life, because it would have been costly to invade Japan. There'd have been millions of men on both sides that would have been killed.
Did you see any type of cemetery on Iwo Jima that they had done? What do you remember about that?
Oh, it's an amazing thing. No, sir, I didn't get to see that. I just wanted to get off of there.
Yeah.
No, it's. I don't know if it's still there. Oh, I guess it is, but I think some of those veterans are deceased, have been returned. Some of our people, even in our local chapter here, have gone back to Iwo. They've had a couple of returns to Iwo, one of which they met with the Japanese and gave them their island back. That's hard to believe.
I know, I've heard that. You know, George, looking back now 60 years and looking at society today, you know, living in this country, what does freedom mean to you? And talk just a moment about freedom and about the price for freedom, being an American and a World War II veteran. What do you have? What's your thoughts about that?
Well, as you know, you see it, freedom is not free. If you enjoy the life you're living and the conditions the way they are, then somewhere you have to thank a veteran. A veteran's been involved in your life somewhere along the line. It's great to be here. I can't imagine living any other place. I never regretted being in the service, and I feel so greatly about these guys that are there, over there now. We knew who our enemies were. They don't. They can't tell an enemy from a friendly person. They're all such a mirage or collection of people who look alike. They're not uniformed for the most part, so they have a hell of a struggle, not knowing their enemy. And same was in Vietnam. Those guys in Vietnam couldn't tell if they were North or South Vietnamese until it was too late, probably. But it's just, you just have to reflect and think what we have and why we have it and who helped provide it. And that's the way I feel.
What would you say to a young person today? We're at a school today. I mean, what's your message to young people today about freedom and the freedoms that we have?
I've talked to a couple of groups there, and I'd tell them just what I told you. If you like what you got, the way you live, you have to thank a veteran somewhere, and it's given you the freedom that you now enjoy, and hopefully will continue. So that's about the story.
That's good.
A kid just turned 18 as I was, enlisted in the Marine Corps, and going that macho and all that hard route. Well, they teach you real quick. You know, you're nothing but another body for them until they make you a man. And they do. I weighed 130 pounds when I enlisted, and I come out of boot camp 160, chiseled, if you will, and never again, or not since. But I did a little everything, as I showed you. I played some baseball and enjoyed being on Maui. I would love to go back. But my wife says when they build a bridge to Hawaii, she'll go.
Yeah.
Otherwise, no shot.
How old are you now, George?
Just turned 80 in August.
So you're what, 19 when you're at EWO? 20?
19. Yep. So that's the way that tune went.
That's good. That's good.
I can't think of anything else significant.
No, that's good.